What does it mean, off the top of your head, to see gray in a world of black and white? Yes, Nancy.
I was a secretary to the group, so I'll list them.
All right, list them all.
Compromise,
Compromise,
try to see both sides.
try to see both sides,
And believe points in each one.
and believe points in each one, okay?
There's often more than two sides.
There's often more than two sides, definitely.
It's not linear, it's more circular and can be multidimensional.
Okay, not linear, more circular, multidimensional. Well, you have an excellent group.
Secretaries.
And see the commonality. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody else, what does it mean to see gray? They said it all? Show off? So, did anybody else come up with anything else? Yes?
One
Mary?
thing that stood out that some people said, being gray is not the same thing as being wishy-washy.
Yes, I think that's very important to say that. And then Rick was kind of alluding to that earlier. It's not that necessarily mushy middle. While I think strongly about everything, especially what the last speaker said. You know how it is when you go someplace, or the last thing you read, or yeah, that's what I think, or that's what I think, and this purpose of this class is for us to not have any convictions. We need convictions. Yeah.
Sometimes you need the freedom to break the rules.
Okay.
If a circumstance comes up and it's not black or white, and because of the person or the situation, you need to do something else.
Yeah.
And to have the freedom to do that.
And what rules are we talking about, Gladys?
I know I couldn't think of an example.
I think we can all relate to that, but I guess right off the top of your head, you kind of think, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about biblical rules? Are we talking about thinking outside the box? Are we thinking about going beyond the traditional way of doing things? Again, one of Adam Hamilton's points is that I think he's willing to consider new possibilities, but I don't think he wants to just let the old things go for fear of just for the want of just wanting to go on to something new.
I was thinking of life situations.
Yeah, okay.
Like say in a school situation, everybody's supposed to do this by a certain date, and there's a home situation with one student.
Yeah.
You need to,
Bend. Okay.
be flexible.
Very good. What does it mean to see gray?
Be a good listener.
Be a good listener. Okay. Tolerance, or what was your word, Cheryl? Accepting. Perhaps we're more accepting.
We talked about why things are more black and white now than what they were in the past.
Yeah, what'd you come up with?
Well, one of the things we mentioned was the instant communication that's available.
Yes, it's there.
Immediately within 5 minutes, you know that such and such has happened, or this has gone on, or whatever it is. In my case, I grew up in a town of 1,200 people, very homogeneous. There were 2 Catholic families in town. So you didn't have a whole lot of diversity in terms of the community or in terms of the thoughts. You went to the Lutheran church or you went to the Baptist church.
Yeah.
And so, of course...
infant baptism or believer's baptism?
Yeah.
It's pretty easy. Yeah.
And now, if you take a look at Rochester, for example, I think there's something like 54 different dialects that are spoken in the school system. And, so we certainly have, we don't have that homogeneous society that we were accustomed to growing up, many of us.
No, we don't. But yet our world feels more black and white rather than homogeneous.
Yes.
I have no final word on this, but I think 2 things contribute to this almost more than anything. The sound bites of the press, and just that he said, she said, this side kind of thing. And then our political system, the 2-party political system, I think, can be a wonderful thing, but it can just do us in. I'd love for Congress to say, I don't know how I'm going to vote. Maybe party line might not be, because I want to do what's good for the country. Can you imagine somebody saying that today? And I just think, I think our political world is filtered down into almost all aspects of family life and church life and everything else. And we think there's 2 sides to things, and there's a million sides to things sometimes. We just don't talk about those. We don't do nuance very well, do we? And this class is hopefully about going deeper. going deeper, doing nuance. Yeah. Yeah, I think that way, the modern communication world has not served us well. I don't think at all. And even in a sermon, you got 12 minutes or so, and there's just so much you can say in that time. It's hard to do nuance at that time either. So it's nice to have a study like this where you can go back and forth and around in circles and really struggle with things and how we think about things.
Context means a lot. Too,
Yes, it does.
Because with these snippets, back to the communication, the snippets, when you hear the whole thing in context,
It's often
makes
different.
a whole different meaning.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
often that way.
Well, and that's going to be the whole thing related to Trayvon Martin. We don't know that context. We want to know the context.
And how long have we been hearing about that? A month
Yeah.
and they're still.
They haven't done anything with it, that's
Yeah.
why. We better hear about it.
That's right. And yesterday, they filed charges, second-degree murder, so they're moving along. But yeah, that context, and we realize that's just one small example of how important context is. Yeah.
And it's important how your point on communications too, how that took off right away. People formed opinions within the first 24 hours. And so it's going to be a very difficult trial.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But speaking about that, there were no whites in the protest movement for Trayvon.
I
Where
saw
were-
some. I
Where
did.
were they? Did you see any?
I saw some.
I'm going, if it's justice we're fighting for, why aren't they out there?
They
Yeah.
are.
I did see some. I did see
Not
some.
many.
But that says something culturally too, doesn't it, Joe? Absolutely. Let's go on to question 4. And this has to do, we'll certainly look at some biblical passages each week, and I give Adam Hamilton a lot of credit for spending time in Scripture for our sake. Jesus criticized the religious leaders of his day. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. What do you think Jesus was getting at, and what are some ways you see Christians straining gnats today? Talk about that in your small group for about 3 minutes, okay?
Ooh, that could be like an hour.
Let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for a beautiful day, a beautiful spring. We thank you for a chance to gather with people that care about issues and find ways to talk to each other. Bless our time, bless the work that we do in this class, and help us and give us ears to hear. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Does everybody have a book? Or at least a book that you can refer to someplace? Good. We do have some extra books in the office. I think it was an extra $1, so I apologize for that. But part of the reason it got more expensive is we wanted to use the local Barnes & Noble. I just think it's good to have bookstores around. So we went there, and they charged us a little bit more, but certainly reasonable, I think. And we're glad that we could use their business and put some money into the local economy. Did everybody pick up study guides on the way in? All right. If you, and by the way, those people back there are not standoffish. They're not lepers. Kurt has a cold, so we gave him a dispensation. But Shirley and Dwayne, if you could come over here, we're going to be doing some work at tables, and we'll go back and forth between large group and tables along the way. I would encourage you to look at the study guide. We're going to, the schedule page, we're going to look at that just briefly so we kind of set some ground rules. So it's the one that says introduction and schedule on the front. Let me just read a little bit of where this is going. Welcome to our book study. In a world in which Christians and others are sharply polarized by a number of controversial issues, no big surprise there. A primary goal of this class is to change your mind about everything. Okay? Guess what? We're not going to try to do that. We might affect some thinking around here, but our goal is not to change your mind. Okay, let me just say that up front. Our goal is to have more constructive dialogue about the topics that are in our world. There's a lot of them. We know what it's like. Turn on the TV, and it's not a pretty picture sometimes. What do we do when we face these topics at Thanksgiving dinner? Can we talk about them or not? Do we walk on eggshells? Can we agree to disagree? Can we perhaps find some ways to talk more constructively? Perhaps there are these possibilities. Perhaps there are more effective ways to talk to each other. Perhaps we can be enlightened by listening to one another. Perhaps in the midst of our conversations, we can discover more things that bind us together than pull us apart. And that's the real issue, I think, for me. As a pastor, as a Christian, we can always find things to fight about. The church has been doing that ever since the first century. Can we find more things that tie us together than pull us apart? That's what's close to my heart. Our schedule, you see it there. I don't have you reading or assigned to read all the chapters in the book. I think you'll find them interesting, so I think you probably will read them as you find time. But we don't have time to talk about all the chapters in the book. And so there's a few of them I have not necessarily listed in the schedule, but as I say there, you know, if there's something you want to talk about, at least in a limited basis, we can certainly ask questions and do some kind of discussing about some of those things. But we won't get to every topic in great detail. You see that I picked kind of a main topic, or perhaps two, for each week. And that will be the focus, primary focus anyway, as we go along. There's no class in the middle on May 10th. But every other week we will hold class. Any questions about that schedule? All right, turn to the next page, or the back side of that page. Just a few housekeeping details. You can attend either the morning or the evening class, or you can alternate between the two. Those of you that haven't done that before, it'll be the same thing in the morning and evening. A similar size group in the evening, I believe, maybe a little smaller, but I don't know. I think about as many are signed up. The class will be videotaped, and a lot of our work will be done in groups, so some of it's going to be of limited value, but it's a way to catch up and hear some of the conversation. You'll get a sense after today if it would be helpful. I think it's helpful to keep up that way if you have to miss. You go on the church website, and what do they look under? Adult?
Adult.
Videos and resources.
Adult videos and resources. So you can find it there. I think it is a way to at least hear some of the conversation.
And we can put a link on the front page.
Okay. There'll also be a link to the study guide. It won't be like a Bible study, though, where I'm filling in all the blanks, because I might fill in a little bit, but most of it, I think, will be work that we do in class. So, but yeah, it's a way to catch up and keep up. If you miss a class and there's some reading materials we passed out, we'll put those online too. We'll also have them available in the office if you don't happen to have a computer or a website. And I think that's probably, any questions on that? All right. I wrote down a sample covenant for our time together, and I want to talk about that briefly, because, you know, these are delicate issues, and they're hard issues. I will not feel the need to agree with everything the C. Gray author says. Maybe that goes without saying, but I think anytime we pass out a book, we should put that disclaimer on there. You know, you've got minds, you can think for yourself. Don't agree with everything. Agree with everything I say, but beyond that. But you know what I'm saying. You know, it's a springboard for a class, and you should test things. You should test things with Scripture. You should test things with things along the way. I will respect the opinions of all. That does not happen in our culture today, does it? Not at all. That's very important. Very, very important. I will strive to listen to others. That does not happen in our culture very readily. Very, very important in a class like this. This one's even more important, I think, number 4. I will not question another's faith or commitment to the Bible, even if they happen to read it differently than I do. Boy, does that happen in our culture and in our world. Not good. Not good when it does happen. You are able to be a follower of Jesus even if you don't see the light like I do. You know, and you know what I'm saying? It's very, very important. I will do my best not to take the class discussion out of context and to bring them up in a negative way in other church settings. That's very important too. You know, this isn't a confidential conversation, but boy, taken out of context. Well, you never believe what so-and-so said at class on Thursday. You know, that just doesn't play very well, because everything we say here, it happens in a context. And so be sensitive to that. I will be willing to express my opinions when it's appropriate. That can be a little hard sometimes. We're not going to twist your arm to speak up, but hopefully we'll create at least a community, a sense of comfort. What do you think? What do you think Jesus was getting at?
It's easier to deal with gnats.
Easier to deal with gnats and camels. That's a very good point. Camels are big. They tend to be bigger than gnats. It's the elephant. Yeah, kind of the elephant in the room. Good analogy. We're probably mixing metaphors, but never hurts. Yep.
We concentrate on the minutiae and don't see the broad picture.
Yeah, don't we though? We concentrate on those little minutiae kinds of things in front of us. What else was Jesus getting at?
Details versus big picture details?
Say that again?
Nitty-gritty details,
Yeah.
minutia versus the big picture.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty versus the big stuff, the big picture. Yeah, and mint, dill, cumin, spices, right? They tithe those things, which sounds kind of funny to us, but I bet they took it deadly seriously, didn't
Why
they?
would it be funny? They tithe chickens or whatever they tithe, they give what they can.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And salt used to be such a...
Yep, valuable commodity. Yeah, so I don't want to make it sound like those things aren't important, but I think Jesus was kind of making that point. Here's the little spices that you're worried about, and what about justice? What about love? Yeah.
It wasn't the salt that he brought up, it was...
So this is a harder question, and certainly one where we don't want to cast too many aspersions, but how do you see Christians straining gnats today? Say that again? How do you see it happening? Yep.
One example our group brought up is the Pope saying we're defective because we're not willing.
Right, if you read the book, the Pope saying we're defective because we're not, well, we don't believe in the Pope.
We spend too much time fighting religion and forgetting that we're Christian.
Yeah,
Lutheran Catholic, Baptist.
we spend too much time deciding what makes us different, maybe, than living as Christians. Okay, what else?
Well, when something's changed in the liturgy, some of us get rid of it.
Can you imagine that?
They don't call it liturgical wars.
Yeah, no, worship wars, that's right. Yep, we can certainly get bent out of shape about things, can't we? Yes, we can. What else? Yep.
Well, I think that this is maybe more an elephant in the room than that, but the ELCA policy on homosexuals is certainly something where we have taken individual stands on that, which is not bad, but again, we're not seeing or looking at oftentimes the big picture.
Right, because right alongside that you could say, what does the Lord require of you but to fight about sex? Or what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God? Yeah.
And that goes back to when divorce became.
Absolutely.
You know, same thing as this issue. It's, you know, it's right and left. I mean,
Yeah, that was a tough time in the church too. I've shared this story before, but when I was in Kansas, starting out in ministry, we were surrounded by Missouri Synod churches, but we had been kicked out of the Missouri Synod in 1817 over, remember the controversy? Predestination. As if we know anything about that. You know, basically rooted in the mind of God, but let's have a huge church fight about it, and then depending on which side you come down, you're either in or out. We got kicked out. And so everybody kind of hated us because we were different. And so it was kind of a strange church and tradition that started. But, you know, the church's been doing that forever, ever, right? If it isn't that, it's something else. Yeah.
Like women being able to vote in the church.
Well, that was
Or be a
serious,
pastor.
yeah. Or what? Or be pastors. Absolutely.
Bishop,
And it always feels like there's no issue that's going to ever be bigger than this one. You know, there is that sense of that, too. This is the end. You know, Jesus might as well come again because it's not going to get any worse than this. It can feel like that. It really can in the church. You know. Yeah, so we've strained lots of nets, probably, haven't we, along the way? And, you know, he shared, and page 9, if you have your book, we might just take a look at that real quick. Once in a while, we will certainly quote from towards the bottom, last paragraph. As Jesus was facing his own death, he prayed for unity among his followers, knowing no doubt that they would struggle with their own tendency to strain gnats, argue endlessly over matters of doctrine, and be forever divided over mint, dill, and cumin. Jesus' metaphor for focusing on the irrelevant details. Our desire for certainty, our need to be right, and our tendency to miss the point have conspired to keep Christians from experiencing unity and have instead led to endless divisions within the Christian faith. And there it goes on, you know, he mentions over 2,000 different denominations, probably more than that. I've heard over 3,000. And tens of thousands of churches that are independent and non-denominational. Though all claim to be followers of Jesus, most have divided over matters of doctrine or ways of practicing their faith. Each feels that their doctrine and practice is more faithful than the others. And it's that last line that really gets us, doesn't it? Because we think that way sometimes. We're right, they're not. They don't know that, but we're right. And we've all heard the jokes, you know, shh, you have to be quiet because they think they're the only ones here in heaven kind of stuff. But there's some truth to that. You were going to say, Lois.
I think that's a real problem, the need to be right. I'm right. I mean, that crops up a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a good thing to figure out, how to deal with that need to be right.
Yeah. It is that, and let's be honest, this isn't just about political matters. This can be in a marriage. Yeah.
I think that's the crux of the issue right there. Is that we all think we have to be right, and even when we've come to the point where we realize my position is wrong, and we still defend it.
Are you talking about Mary?
Yeah. You know, I had a great experience, premarital counseling earlier this year, where there was a couple, and one of the exercises in our premarital counseling thing, we get this readout, and some couples, you decide if they're strong in the area of conflict resolution, and this couple clearly wasn't. Clearly wasn't at all. And then there's an exercise, 10 steps for resolving couple conflict. And they realized when they went through that they had never resolved anything as a couple. Most of the time they just, you know, bit their tongues eventually and then agreed to disagree, or they didn't even get that far. They just didn't talk about it. And so this couple, one time, again, they'd never done this. They were on the way out for supper on a Friday night. They didn't know where they were going. They were going to decide on the way. Well, they figured they couldn't decide. So they ended up in the parking lot at Apache Mall for 2 hours talking about where they were going out to dinner. I'm not making this up, but guess what? By the time they were done, they had resolved their first conflict of their lives. And sometimes it's about the need to be right, and sometimes it's about power, and sometimes it's about a lot of things. But I think sometimes we've never learned how to do these things. Sometimes at a most fundamental level, we've never learned how to resolve conflict in our lives. And so then we wonder why we can't in our relationships, with our children, with our spouses, with our next door neighbors, with anything.
I also think the flip side of needing to be right is the fear of being wrong.
Yes.
You know, and fear is such a strong driver that you know, in an effort to make sure you don't screw up, you don't take that step to go one way, or you say, oh, well, they all seem pretty strong about that. I'll just go with them.
Yeah, yeah. That's an excellent point, that fear of being wrong. Yeah. Question 5. This is going to be fun. One of our goals for the class will be to go beyond the heated rhetoric of our culture and to reclaim the values of the words we use. In this vein, what are some positive things you think of when you hear the word conservative? We're just being positive here.
We'll find out real quick how long it takes somebody to say something about this.
Yeah, there you go.
The southern
Yes.
states.
Agricultural conservation of our soil.
Okay, that's not the first thing that came to my mind, but agricultural conservation of our soil.
I grew
Okay.
up on a farm.
All right, grew up on a farm. Very good, yes.
Respect for tradition and for things, just respect.
Absolutely. Respect for tradition. Absolutely.
I think of my father. The first thing I think of when the word conservative comes into mind is that, because it does kind of define who he is.
Yes, and you
But
have
I love
a love for your father. You're in a relationship with your father, and so you respect that part of him.
Decency.
Decency.
Pragmatism.
Pragmatism. I think one of the most important things about conservatism in our culture, and part of the larger conversation, is that lifting up of personal values and responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, self-reliance. That's important. You know, I grew up in the 60s to some extent, and you know, we started to slide in our country, didn't we? And there's an important voice that needs to be spoken about personal values and responsibility. Absolutely.
I think that's huge.
Yeah. Other things.
I think the attention to not wasting what is. I mean, you know, just making sure that we make good use of what is there.
Making good use of what is there. Other things.
Maybe start thinking about ourselves.
Okay.
Out instead
And the word conservative makes you think of that. Okay.
of what I wore.
It's interesting.
Thinking about others instead of just ourselves. It's an outward kind of focus. It can be an outward focus. Yeah. I think about in the Christian church, the respect for Ancient creeds and doctrines, you know, you don't just set those aside. The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, which we use in the season of Easter. There's an ancient historic tradition that we operate out of. It's important. It's important to me. You know, we don't always stop to think about it, but it's important to us, I think. All right, that didn't hurt, right? Let's see if the next one hurts. What are some positive things you think of when you hear the word liberal? And by the way, that is not a positive word in our world today. I think a lot of times.
I am one.
What?
I am one.
You are one, okay, well there you go. But positive things when you hear the word liberal.
Thinking of others.
Tolerant, okay? Thinking of others, okay?
Less fortunate.
Less fortunate.
Forward thinking.
Forward thinking.
Quite often new thoughts or ideas.
Say it again.
Quite often new thoughts or ideas.
Okay, so new thoughts or ideas, an openness to those things?
Free thinking.
Free thinking?
Which one is introspective?
Introspective, I think could probably fit into either. Yeah.
Responsibility, be liberal and responsible.
Yes, you can. I think in this country, liberals have tended to be, these are stereotypes, but more socially responsible perhaps than individually responsible. At least how they're classically defined in this country.
Depends on whether you're talking politics, church,
Can be.
or other things.
Sure.
Whether you're liberal or conservative.
It certainly can be, but that's nuance. Now you're talking nuance. It can be different depending on which part of your life you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, both of them are relative, like both getting the kids, you know, you think you could be conservative until you speak to somebody else and you find out that maybe you're not as conservative as you thought you were.
Absolutely. And to me, I think that's kind of a helpful thing, really.
It is.
You know, when we went down and visited Hope in West Des Moines, there was a group of us from staff from church just to go down there and see. They're an interesting church, very successful in the LCA, and they had been visited by Fred Phelps one Sunday. I don't think many of you are further to this side of Fred Phelps. You all know Fred Phelps?
Fred Phelps.
Fred Phelps is a Baptist church pastor with a group of very dedicated other Baptists, very conservative, and they go around the country. They're most known for setting up protests at funerals, especially military funerals. Military funerals. Yes, the church in Kansas. Military funerals, and they protest because they say, as long as the United States allows gays in the military or whatever, and has the stances that it does, we are going to protest. And so they show up at some of the worst times and say some of the worst things at funerals you could possibly imagine. Yeah. Very, 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 very sad situation. Most of us are not where Fred Phelps are.
Makes me feel good there are only 100 members of that.
Yeah, okay.
And the Westbury Baptist, St. Patrick's congregation, are they a registered Baptist type congregation, or do they just pick up that name?
I think a lot of the evangelical traditions are very loosely affiliated. There's a lot more variety in some of those than you'd ever find even in the LCA, which has a lot of variety too. But yeah, the point is that, yeah, it's all relative, even when we say the word liberal or conservative. It really is. Okay, that wasn't so hard, was it? All right. These are relative terms. There's a wide spectrum. And his point is that perhaps the term liberal and conservative could apply to all of us to some extent, right? Now again, we're not going on CNN to proclaim this or Fox News to proclaim this, right? But perhaps those terms could apply to all of us to some extent. Question 7. Respond to the quote on the page of the introduction. My own faith approach to controversial issues is that any issues about which thinking Christians disagree likely has important truth on each side of the debate. The key is to listen to both sides and look for ways to integrate the legitimate concerns of each side, often forging a new way forward, or at least plowing forward, that's quite a verb, but at least plowing forward while taking seriously the views of the other. This willingness to listen to those with whom we disagree and to take seriously their legitimate concerns is critical for people of all religions and nationalities. Until we can learn to do that, there will be no hope for resolving the cultural wars here at home, nor the broader international conflicts that threaten our world. Spend a few moments at your table talking about that, the challenge of that, maybe the hopefulness of that, and see where you get. Okay? What, how did you respond to that quote from Adam Hamilton? What did you talk about? How did you respond to that quote? What did you talk about at your table?
Well, we had somebody who talked about how they listened for a long time to someone on an issue and weren't convinced and didn't feel that good about it. But we applauded her for listening.
Yeah, okay. So somebody over here was a good listener for a long time, didn't feel that good about it, and then the rest of the class said, good, or the table, good for you for listening. Yeah.
Are you listening to total facts, or are you listening to a prejudiced, twisting of facts?
Everyone in this room is biased. Everyone in this room is biased. Yeah. So yeah, we're listening to the second part of it. Because, let's be honest, we can't even have agreement on the eyewitness account of what happened with Trayvon Martin. That's maybe a handful of people. So we're all going to come at things from our own traditions and perspectives, the way we were raised. Absolutely. I can guarantee you if there was a, and we ran into this when we had the Islam class, the Muslim over there and the Christian over here, and maybe somebody that grew up in Palestine over there, they heard things differently.
They don't trust each other. I don't blame them.
So what else? What else? How else do you respond?
I'm sorry, there was an eagle.
Hey, that's cool.
Is that an omen?
It could be. Way to go.
Yes, it means good weather from here on in.
Good weather from here on in. What else? How else do you respond to that?
I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, somebody in our group brought up the analogy to plowing a field, and the first time you break ground to plow a field, it's very difficult. So the first time, we're looking more at it from an international, talking with other countries. The first time we're trying to, sit down and listen to Iran and North Korea, maybe is difficult like it is to first break ground and get that first plowed field, but then if you keep it plowed, or keep the dialog going, that might be really get some hope.
Okay, so the first time you plow a field, it can be difficult, especially in international relations. But the longer you work with that soil, the more receptive it is, should we say, for the efforts. Yeah, we ran into that when we were in Tanzania trying to start a mission partnership, and we're sitting around the table, and it's like agreeing about words and what we were saying was very hard. But the more times we met around the table, the easier it was, the more free we were to speak our mind, and that felt good to us. We'd go back to our sleeping quarters and we'd debate long and hard about what we could bring up and how we could say it. And then we got there, and it seemed like the longer we talked, the more we were just free to just say it. Just have it, get it out on the table. In a respectful way, of course.
Don't you think in planting, you think you're going to plant something, and as you work with the soil, you find out that isn't going to work, I have to change and plant something
Sometimes,
else,
sure.
something else in there.
Absolutely. Sometimes what you're trying to plant in that soil isn't going to grow. Yeah, good analogy.
I brought up the word compromise so often has negativity to it.
Compromise certainly can have a negative compromise. It can be positive though too.
But I mean, I think so often when we hear that word, we think something that's negative. At least what we're getting, the snippets and everything right now, I think what's current on the airwaves is the word compromise has more negative
Okay,
to it.
all right.
At least that's what I'm hearing.
Well, it'd be nice to see something once in a while.
Yes, it would, wouldn't it? It'd be nice to see a little bit more of that. Sometimes you think that word doesn't exist in Washington anymore.
I think it goes back first to your communication with what you gave it. It's a huge factor in our society now. I mean, we can have our little church here and get together and have this dialogue and so on and so forth. We might have a council of churches. But when you're listening to television, or you look, we get a ton of emails that get forwarded to us from around the country, classmates and friends. And you're getting, it's like, preaching to the choir. It's the same stuff flowing. And it's the stuff that just turns you, really upsets you.
Yeah.
Because you're not getting stuff, that you don't have a chance to dialogue with anybody, to really get an understanding of it and try to debate it and so on and so forth. And it's the same way with television. So
Yeah.
you keep getting bombarded depending on what you're watching. And it's very difficult to seem to feel like you're making any progress towards gray whatsoever.
That's right. That's exactly right. We can get, and we know where to find the information that's going to make us happier. Let's be honest. We know what station those things are. We perhaps get a steady diet of that. But yeah, I think modeling a different way forward is hard work. I think it has to start around tables like this, and maybe start with next door neighbors. And that's the question you could ask about the Adam Hamiltons of this world. Is this all just wishful thinking? Can we possibly go up against the press? And I don't know. But boy, I'm not going to just sit back and say, I'm not going to try, because ultimately this affects the condition of my heart. And maybe you're saying some of that too, Dick. It's like, we have to talk about these things. If nothing else, maybe I can change my little corner of the world, and maybe that's just me, ultimately. Maybe I'll look at things differently. Maybe I'll have a different respect, not only a tolerance, but an acceptance of that person, that next door neighbor. Maybe I'll listen to them differently. Maybe.
I think it's a step forward in my thinking, at least. Because a lot of times I don't know what certain words really mean.
Yeah.
When you talk about conservative and liberal.
Sure.
I think the step forward is to not even say, I'm a conservative,
Yes.
I'm a liberal. Because it tends to turn off this person if they're considering themselves just the opposite.
Yeah. Can we find?
It may not be as different as you think they are.
Yeah. Can we find? I totally agree with that. That's well said. We throw those words out, and then we assume we know what it means. Yeah, they talk about the Senate and how they used to all go out for drinks after they did their work, the U.S. Senate, and now they don't do that anymore. And we're missing something when they quit doing that, because maybe we're not so different as we think we might be sometimes. Absolutely.
Send me a message again.
Yep.
It sure seems like, we talk about the light overcoming the darkness, but I don't know, sometimes it seems to me the darkness is.
The winning.
Yeah.
We talked about the light overcoming the darkness, if you didn't hear that, but it seems like the light is winning the darkness is winning these days. Yeah.
What about this situation where Jeanette listened and listened to this? Why don't you tell?
Oh, no. No, it was an interesting conversation where I knew we were on two different sides, and I wanted to hear, and I knew that she had done a lot of biblical study on her side, and I had done biblical study on my side, and come to different conclusions, and so I wanted to have an in-depth conversation. You tell me why you have come to the conclusion that you have. And I listened, and I listened, and I listened, and I said, okay, I think you're wrong. I couldn't.
She was.
I couldn't, no. I couldn't resolve it. I couldn't accept it at all. And I listened, and I listened, and I listened. And in the end of the conversation, I had to say, I respect you for your your scholarly attitude. I respect you for your thoughtfulness, but I cannot agree.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, it's okay. I felt disappointed. I wished that I could have understood, but I just couldn't.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, I think it maybe makes a difference if you went at your Bible study looking for a resolution, and she went at it as a way of affirming her conviction. That makes a difference too, of
Right.
course.
What you're trying to get across. We read a book last year, and I might bring in that chapter, it's not long, It's called God's Welcome. Staff read it, council read it, because we were talking about creating a place for all that belong. So we read this book called God's Welcome. And one of the things, I think it was like Devotion 12 or something, they talked about, can we have those kind of conversations where you ask Uncle Henry at Thanksgiving, so tell me what you think, and why do you think that way? And why is that important for you? But my thought at the end, Jeanette, was, you don't need to tell Uncle Henry, you're wrong, or I don't think you're right. Maybe you just say, you know, I can respect that. I can respect that.
That's what you
I don't need you to change. I don't need you to be different. And maybe Uncle Henry will ask you what you think. Maybe he won't. Let's be honest, maybe he won't. But you know, I thought, what a novel idea to create welcome in our life by just finding out what makes somebody tick. Why do you need to change them anyway? Why do you need to tell them they're wrong, or they're shallow, or whatever? Maybe they just need somebody to listen to them. You really hope that Uncle Henry will ask you, what do you think? But a lot of times, they might not get to that. Who knows? Paul, were you going to say something? No, okay.
I've been trying to get him to say something the whole time.
Yeah, you know.
He's listening.
Paul hardly has an opinion about anything. You know? Yeah, interesting. It's hard. Okay, let's go on to question 8. By the way, most of our sessions will last about an hour and a half. And if you need to leave early, I understand, but there's just lots to talk about. So Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13, now we see in a mirror dimly. What are the implications of Paul's statement for our conversations in this class? We'll talk about that as a large group here. What are the implications of seeing in a mirror dimly? Now, faith, hope, and love abide, these 3. We walk by faith, not by sight. We may not be seeing everything. Our view may be distorted. Sometimes we're only seeing ourselves.
What was that?
We're only seeing ourselves.
Well, I was going to say, speaking for myself, I realized I didn't really know myself. Looking in the mirror, I realized I didn't really know myself until I retired 20 years ago and got to spend 24/7 with this guy.
Poor guy.
And then she helped you to see. Yeah.
I really, some tangible, defined things that I could work on, like in control.
Yeah.
Always being right.
Yeah.
Perfectionist. I mean, I can go on.
Can we get these on the board?
I thought to myself, how much, and part of it was I was spending more time in groups like this reading the Bible. But I thought to myself, how much happier I would have been if I could have been exposed to the same things when I was 25 instead of 55 or 60.
Well, thanks for being honest about that, Nick, because I think there's a lot of people in the room that have all struggled with that along the way, and still are. It's not too late.
Well, it's getting awful late.
No. Don't even go there. It's not too late for any of us.
But at 25, maybe you wouldn't have recognized it anyway.
No, it's
possible, because I knew it.
So did I.
Children make you realize how little you know.
No, isn't that the truth? Yep. Now we see in the mirror dimly. Anything else on that?
I think it's, and they said this in the book, don't be too convinced that you're right, because you may change your mind, you know, we've all been there.
Yeah.
You know, and trying to convince other people that you're right may not be the really big picture.
Yeah. I am the potter, you are the clay, Mary. This is Jesus, or God talking, right? And would it be so wrong if maybe along the way you or any of us here had a change of heart about something? Maybe, if nothing else, understood Uncle Henry a little bit better? Really? Rather than not talking? Would it be so wrong? Paul, you were going to say something, I can tell.
I do think that the word limit
is key to understanding this particular section of verse. Is that to say that I see in a mirror dimly is to admit I have limitations. And if I can begin there, I can have strong convictions. I think as I have strong convictions, I also realize I have limitations, which then I hope would force me to say, let me listen to others, and we together might have a little bit more of a better understanding.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah. Question 9, we're coming up to the end here. How would the political discourse in this country be different if we practiced more genuine humility? Maybe that goes without saying, but what do you think? How would things be different?
More decisions would be made on what's best for the country or for the state or the city or whatever the entity happens to be.
Okay.
The way they're made now.
So more people would be concerned about the bigger picture. Okay? How about the rest of you? What do you think?
And you'd be a better listener.
We'd spend more time listening. Isn't it just drive you nuts to listen to things where people just end up talking over each other on TV?
Yes.
I just can't listen after a while. I understand some of it, but after a while it's like, stop and listen to each other. Yeah, and I don't know why they don't try to control that more. I know, it's almost impossible sometimes. But so I'm not going to invite you back to this show if you don't learn to, the basic etiquette, one person at a time is going to speak here.
Yeah, but people like that.
Yeah, it's a show.
It's about ratings.
People like to hear that.
I suppose. Do they really?
They would not be in their show if they did not have a market.
I suppose. I suppose.
Not everybody.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of them.
Ellen?
What are we teaching our kids about civility when we see that?
Exactly. Not very much.
I heard somebody say, and I think this is so true, that our politicians are such huge examples of what it is to be a bully. Our politicians just continually on the air, on TV, in the press, completely bully each other. The only difference is they all have power, but they're constantly saying how terribly wrong my opponent is, and my opponent is a fool, and my opponent is completely wrong, and my opponent has no points, nothing of value. How can we let our politicians do that and then tell our kids not to bully each other?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. All the more reason to at least hold them up as some sort of example. Maybe it's a bad example, but to at least call it what it is, and maybe encourage them to take a different tack.
I still think that the way Jeanette handled her conversation with that person was modeling the kind of behavior. And I think in her way, she made an impact. I don't know, I just would hope so.
We trust the Spirit to be at work. We don't ever change people's hearts, do we? The Spirit works in people's hearts. And I wasn't trying to make her feel bad for saying, I don't agree with you, or I respectfully disagree with you. How we say that at the end, how we leave that, I think creates perhaps space, hopefully, in our relationships with Uncle Henry and others. Anybody here named Henry? Yeah. Number point 10. And this is a quote from Adam Hamilton. This is a bold statement. I believe that Christianity is in need of a new reformation. The fundamentalism of the last century is waning, and the liberalism of the last 50 years has jettisoned too much of the historic Christian gospel to take its place. Christianity's next reformation will strike a middle path between Jerry Falwell and John Shelby Spong. It will draw upon what is best in both fundamentalism and liberalism by holding together the evangelical and social gospels, by combining a love of Scripture with a willingness to see both its humanity as well as divinity, and by coupling a passionate desire to follow Jesus Christ with a reclamation of his heart towards those whom religious people have often rejected. This reformation will be led by people who are able to see the gray in a world of black and white. That's a strong statement, isn't it? What's he trying to do there? What's he saying there? What's at stake, I guess, in finding a middle path?
being able to be civil to people.
Civility is part of it, okay? What else?
Trying to strike a balance.
Trying to strike a balance.
Giving up some truth.
Maybe giving up some of your truth. Your little corner of truth over there.
I think it's interpretation of the Bible too.
Can be part of it. Interpretation of the Bible, absolutely.
I think in many ways the very future of Christianity in the broader culture is at stake. I mean,
Yeah.
you listen to what young people think of church outside, you know, who are sitting on the periphery of the church, and there's not a whole lot of good news for us, folks. And so if we don't strike a middle path, if we don't take some of this stuff seriously, I think that, you know, the faith in Jesus, I think the church as a whole is really at stake.
I think a good example is to go to visit a mega church or two or three and see why are they so huge and why they tend to be growing, I think. And see what the differences are. And why is the traditional churches kind of on the downslide? And maybe that's part of what he's talking about.
Yeah. We can talk about that more, but we won't have time to get into all those things. But, you know, we were at a conference in January, and the latest research shows that, and we know this, in the last 40 years, mainline churches, and there's some definite reasons, have been tending to go this way, and I think are tending more that way. But guess what? Evangelical churches are going the same rate. They're just a little behind. There isn't any churches in this country that are growing except Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and a couple of Pentecostal churches. Everybody else is tending downward. Everybody. Now there's exceptions like West Des Moines and Adam Hamilton in Kansas City and maybe Autumn Ridge, I don't know. But there's a lot of people turned off by what's happening in the church today and not engaged by the good news of Jesus Christ. And we at least have to stop and ask the question, what do we do about that? Yeah. What else do you hear here? Yes, Nancy?
The conversation in our table was similar to what Pastor Jason was saying, is that, you know, the conservative Christians have their belief here and they're strong, and the liberal Christians are here and they're strong, and they fight each other.
Yeah.
And the example that young people see is they're fighting each other and they can't get along, and that's what I want to do.
Right. And that's what teens and 20s are seeing, is churches that are so entrenched that they're not finding the ability to live out the good news. The good news to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly kind of stuff. And what else?
I think as we see a mixing of the cultures in the young. I mean, it used to be, you know, a Lutheran would date a Lutheran and marry a Lutheran, and a Catholic would marry a Catholic, and that sort of thing. Now we're seeing more intermingling of religions and cultures and that. So I think we're going to be seeing the churches take a different pathway to help meld couples, you know, and families as the new generations come up the line.
Yeah, we do some very specific things, like when it comes to couples coming for pre-married work, and you know, it used to be we had to put Lutherans and Catholics together, but now it's who knows, Lutherans and Jewish people, or Lutherans and Buddhists, or probably more this person that fell away from something a while ago, and this person that fell away from something a while ago, and never the even tradition got brought up for the last 15, 20 years.
Or one of the couple is very strong in their religious
Can be.
belief, and the other one is not, and so they go towards the stronger.
Yeah, and part of our goal in premarital work is just to get them talking about it, because a lot of people never even get around to talking about their spiritual background, and then we want them to set some goals, whatever those goals might happen to be, but just start on the road down. Yeah.
I remember going through, Dean and I went to married enrichment thing about 30 years ago. We've been married about 25 years at that point. And we seem to have come full circle, because the very first thing, this was up at the Chief Knights, and it was run by the Catholic. And the very first thing he told us was, there is, one thing I want you all to understand, there is no right or wrong, there just is.
Yeah.
Now, that's kind of what we're getting to, I think, in this gray business. There is, but we still have to be discerning. We still have to have some convictions about some of these things. Yeah. And I thought at the time it was one of the most stupid things I've ever heard. But maybe there's some truth to that.
Yeah. Very good. Well, lots of interesting things. We will pick it up where we left off. I invite you to do your homework. Bring your questions, write them down, so that you remember when we get here. Thank you for your sensitivity to this topic. Go in peace, create a place for all to worship.